I think, Ralph, just looking at my notes, I think it was you that mentioned the power of education. We all get that. When I was in my 30s, about 5 years ago, one of the people that mentored me was the chief executive officer of Tiger Brands, who at the time was leading Prime Media, a gentleman called Peter Matlare. And I was a journalist. I was a newsreader. I was happy to be in the trenches reporting the stories. He took me into his office one day and said, you know nothing about business and you work for a commercial radio station. And he promptly packed me off to a business school. I hated it. I really did. I was innumerate. I didn't understand the power of things like distribution and spreadsheets and industrial psychology and all of that stuff that a good business education encompasses. But I passed. I came out of it. I sweated. It was hard work for me. But I came out and I have a better understanding of business through the power of education. And I cannot stress that enough. If you're sitting here and you're not thinking about where your next position is, where your next journey is in terms of education, you should not be sitting here at all. And that segues nicely into our next speaker, Jonathan Foster-Pedley. He's the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. He specializes in innovative and rich learning design. Folks, listen to him, because this could also spark some thought in you and perhaps guide you in your continuing journey. John, where are you? Typical, right at the very end there. I'll just hang about and wait. There we go. You don't need to clap, he's done nothing yet, okay? All right.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Henny, I love that story about the parking. I've got my own parking at work. I drive a 1995 old Toyota Bucky full of dents, so nobody will park next to it. So it's always empty around me, it's no problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's wonderful to be able to speak to you. Today I'm going to talk briefly about the call to leadership and why we have to answer it and why you have to answer it. But first, a bit of background. I'm an educator, a dean, and that's a privileged position to be in. I get to see our upcoming African talent, and it's in good shape. I'm going to prove that to you in a minute with the aid of a couple of stories and facts. We have amazing people in Africa. People listening to the call of leadership. When Madiba passed, people worried that we have no more heroes, no more leaders. In my view and in my experience, nothing is further from the truth. We have them growing everywhere. The seeds of heroism from Madiba and his generation have found fertile soil and are flourishing if you know where to look, and they're closer to home than we might think. I work for an international business school that by most independent standards is ranked as one of the top 1% in the world. The Economist ranked our full-time MBA students as the best in the world for 3 years running. The toughest standards bodies in the USA, the UK, European Union, as well as in South Africa, accredit and audit us. We're the oldest business school in Europe, and we operate in China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Middle East, Europe, Canada, and Africa. And all our MBA students from all those countries are blind assessed by the same tough independent examiners in Europe, examiners who will never lower their standards. And guess where our best students in the world are? Africa. South Africa, to be specific. In our last exams, our South African pass rate was between 95% and 98%. Better than the Brits, better than the Danes, the Germans, the Finns, the Chinese, the Swedes, and the French. 71% black Africans, 42% women. It's amazing, right? When our highly experienced international lecturers come and work with our executive MBA students, people like you, average age 38, working people with families, they say they are thrilled by the passion for learning, by the discipline, the attentiveness, and by their spirit. All this is true. This is leadership in action. There's a new revolution unfolding in South Africa that no one's really cottoned on to yet. Adults loving learning. Adults who believe in themselves. and who won't be made smaller by the excesses of the few. Henley is around the world and runs 3 types of MBA, one of them here. And in South Africa, we now have 60%, over half, of Henley's global intake of students, including Europe and the UK. Our South African agenda is now driving our global education agenda. I can tell you that no one quite believes it over in the UK. When the Vice Chancellor, Sir David Bell, came over for our graduation last November for the first time, he was blown away by the vibe, by the praise singers, by the Soweto String Quartet, by the 3 tenors, the ululations, the kids, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the great-great-grandparents, and the whole extended Indaba. He's now trying to work out how to get that vibe into the UK. Good luck to him. We own the spirit. For too long, we've confused education with intelligence. Actually, as we all know, just because you had an education doesn't necessarily mean you're intelligent. Face it, there are some pretty dumb educated folks out there, and I assure you, there's many a day when I'm one of them, okay? Just because you didn't have access to education doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. In fact, we have all the intelligence we need in Africa. What we need is fair access, accelerated access for talented poor, more skills and more exposure. The reality the world is waking up to, and I believe that we are only really just waking up to ourselves here in South Africa, is that Africans are seriously talented and seriously intelligent. But both this talent and intelligence needs serious development and education. In some ways, our history may have crushed our self-confidence, colonization of the mind, as Steve Biko called it, and he was right. We have a right to be confident. We now need a new generation of leaders who will use power and money well for the common good, not for their own. People can always be manipulated and their minds can get colonized in one way or another. One of the leaders of Nazi Germany, Hermann Göring, said, "Naturally the common people don't want war, neither in Russia nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany." That is understood. But after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. In effect, he's saying that unethical leaders can always entrench themselves in power by creating an external enemy or threat, be they Jews, communists, whites, blacks, labor, capital, English, Chinese. And people will rally around and follow. We have to avoid this limited and dark future at all costs. Why? Because it's now Africa's time. Why is it Africa's time? Over the last 10 years, 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies have been in Africa. 5 African countries have been growing faster than China, 21 growing faster than India, and all except 2 of the 54 African countries have been growing faster than both Europe and the USA. By 2030, Africa will have a larger workforce than China, and by 2050, we'll have the largest workforce in the world. In the next few decades, and how few decades depends on us, hundreds of millions of Africans will be lifted out of poverty, as in previous decades, Asian people were lifted out of poverty in Asia. Business is now the driving force in Africa. So we need a new generation of ethical and ambitious leaders to lead us in the future, new heroes. And I often ask myself, who are these new African heroes? Let me tell you about one. I met Themba Baloyi in 2003. He was brought up in poverty in KwaZulu-Natal in a polygamous marriage, walking barefoot 15 kilometers each day to and from school. He studied, like many people did, in cramped family conditions, doubtless with kids and bare light bulbs in a small house. He did okay, and when I met him, he was doing a job in insurance, and he was a student on a junior management program. But he could ask questions. Nothing would stop him thinking, and no answer fully satisfied him. He was a perfect student. He joined Discovery. One day he listened to Adrian Gore, CEO of Discovery, speak. He was so inspired, he told Adrian he was going to leave to build a business that would make a difference to people. Adrian challenged him to stay and do that at Discovery, so he did. He had an idea for a new form of car insurance and worked nights from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. developing his ideas. A diabetic, he took up marathon running and did 10 comrades. He started and finished an MBA with Henley over 4 years. He married and had kids. It took 6 years for his ideas to be accepted. In that time, he'd keep coincidentally bumping into Adrian in a car park late at night on the way out of work. He'd go running with Adrian, and being a little faster, he would wait till 10 kilometers had passed, and Adrian was tired and worn out, and his resistance was low, and he'd hammer in again with his pitch. Brilliant. Eventually he won. He was given his head to launch an idea, which was, of course, Discovery Insure, a new form of car insurance for South Africa, and now doing very well. And that's not all. Last week, Temba was chosen by the World Economic Forum to be one of their young global leaders. And what's he going to do with that? He sees it as a call to leadership, to serve. He's going to use it to make a difference, a push for education, discipline, and self-belief. And let me tell you about another African leader, African hero, who has listened to the call to lead. Fred Swaniker, as many of you may know, and may even be here today. Are you here today, Fred? Oh, thank goodness. Okay, I can get away with it, can I? Thanks a lot. Okay. Founded the African Leadership Academy. At a recent TED Talk, Fred told a story of his life from a refugee from coups in Gambia and Ghana and to being brought up in Botswana and Zimbabwe. His call to leadership was to dedicate himself to make the continent great for education, and he is busy founding universities throughout the continent, starting here in Johannesburg. Because in fact, he sees leadership in Africa in 4 generations or stages. The first stage are the liberators, freeing Africa from colonialism and abuse like Nyeri and Nkrumah. The second generation were those who brought chaos to Africa through war, corruption, and abuses. Leaders like Mobutu and Sani Abacha, and I've met some. The third generations are the stabilizers. Although far from perfect, they've started to bring stability and better macroeconomic policies, arguably like people like Paul Kagame, arguably in Rwanda. They've started to address the issues of institutions and regional agreements. One of Fred's insights, shared by many, is that in the absence of strong institutions and governance, then democracy is really difficult. In Africa, the difference between one good or one bad president can make or break a country because we don't necessarily have the stabilizing influence of those institutions. So what we have now is the emergence of a 4th generation, the transformers, a generation committed to building competitiveness and prosperity through skills, education, and entrepreneurship, a generation that will build the institutions without which there can be no security or stability. And this generation is you. Your generation, our generation today. You have the call to step up and lead. Your heroism is not revolution. It's harder than that. It's to build a fair and prosperous Africa through gaining skills, creating jobs, and building institutions. And it's no good looking behind us to see who's there. There's no one there. It's us. It's our turn, warts and all. The secret about the call to lead is that if you listen to it, it's scary, tough, self-sacrificing, and about service. It's about courage, but there's no better game in town. You have to understand, we have to understand, it's about you as you are with all your imperfections. I don't think you can be good or great until you realize you're not perfect. The truth is that accepting the call of leadership, following a purpose, is what creates leaders. It's what turns you into a leader, not the other way around. Leadership forms you as a leader. There's no other way to learn it. It's the ultimate life school. It's what makes you real. So who are the new African heroes? The people who are going to take the country forward. Not people with guns. Not the people with populist slogans. Not people who live in the past. People who take responsibility and strive hard to bring change. People who educate themselves and others. People who address the past by providing skills and opportunities to do something about the present. People who work hard and think of all our children's futures. People who understand that in world competitiveness there are no favors and no shortcuts. People who believe in their intelligence and significance sufficiently to commit themselves to learning. Only the ability to learn can make you future-proof. Power without constraints leads to abuse. Leadership's about purpose, not self-interest. Leaders like Modi in India and Jose Mujica in Uruguay. Uruguay, he's just stepped down now, but he gave away most of his income, drives an old VW Beetle, and lives in a ramshackle farm, and has driven through some of the most far-reaching reforms in the history of his country. The call to leadership, if you take it, brings with it access to power and money. What defines you is how you use those things. We must use those to develop people and make them independent, not to be a burden on government or keep people dependent. Dependent people are vulnerable and therefore able to be manipulated and therefore to keep them poor and to keep bad leaders in power. It's an endless cycle of disempowerment and poverty. People must be set free to do things for themselves, equipped with skills to international standards. Knowing how to use money and power for good is critical. So I'm going to end up with a small thought for the future. I have a friend, a great teacher, who says, "What's your next big question?" If you have a boring question, you're going to have a boring life. So what's your question? What question is big enough and interesting for you? My question is, how quickly can we be the leaders that we deserve to have? Thank you.
Jon, thank you very much.